All right. So as we wait for a few more folks to log on, how about you folks let me know who's joined us today. Let's go ahead and use the chat to say our names, our LHD affiliations, and just to get some ideas going, some of the reasons your team might be engaging with different types of stakeholders. We'll get started in 1 or 2 minutes. So once we get going, please feel free to add questions to the chat at any time. We'll stop a couple of times during the session to take questions, but definitely don't feel like you need to hold on to them until then. Let's see. Jenna says, sharing impact with current and prospective partners. Fabulous. Let's see. Victoria says that they also want to share impact with our funded partners. And it says stakeholders needed to attain/maintain PSE changes in neighborhood and community-wide settings. Amazing. Brian says incorporating and uplifting those who may already be doing the work/have community connections. That's wonderful. Let's see. Laura says to create changes that are community centered without duplication of services. Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, it's 10:05, so I think we're going to get started just because we have a jam-packed schedule for today. But please, if you're in the middle of typing out a response, please feel free to still share it in chat when you're ready. But I'll trudge on ahead. So certainly there are countless reasons why you would want to engage with stakeholders, right? Beyond the fabulous answers that folks have given in the chat. Some of these reasons might include to support program visibility and to spotlight your successes. You might be engaging simply for the sake of growing your relationships and not necessarily in connection to a particular project. Or you could be mobilizing your community towards collaboration on a new initiative, or perhaps engaging them to support collaborative scaling of a past or existing initiative. And finally, at this point, one of your driving whys might very well be the funding application package, which lists that presenting to a community decision-making body, at least annually, is a core objective. So at minimum, our hope today is to make this objective a little bit easier. And also, if you're already engaging with stakeholders, to give you some additional confidence and to give you some tools to make sure that these are as effective as possible. So There are clearly so many reasons why you might be engaging stakeholders. However, we recognize that the how might be more challenging than identifying a why, right? Figuring out how to effectively form a communication strategy for different situations and stakeholder types. We heard this feedback in our surveys conducted for the LHD Data Storytelling Toolkit, as well as a TA and training survey. In response, we created this webinar as well as a corresponding supplemental resource, which I will introduce shortly, with the goal of supporting you with strategies and tools to enhance the impact and effectiveness of your stakeholder engagements. So a big thank you for filling out our surveys. We really do appreciate your time and feedback, and we do our best to be responsive through webinars like this. So over the next hour and a half, we'll be diving into best practices for tailoring communications to different audiences and different decision points you'll want to consider along the way. We'll also be spotlighting how to maximize impact when engaging with current versus potential partners, as well as decision makers. Along the way, we'll be exploring data sources available to you in situations where they'd be most impactful. And finally, we'll be exploring lessons learned from 2 different LHDs who have engaged diverse stakeholders in their work. So let's begin with general best practices for tailoring communication materials. I'll hand things off now to Robin Braswell-Wax. Robin is pursuing a master's degree in program evaluation. She has a special interest in effective stakeholder communication and has been working with NPI to develop today's training and supplemental resources as a part of an 8-month practicum. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you. Hi there, Summer, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you and have the opportunity to share some of what I've been learning over these past several months. So I'm just going to dive right in. So when you're working to develop an effective strategy for communicating with various stakeholder groups, there are a number of decision points to consider. And today we're going to be walking through 5 core steps within this process, and we'll be looking at considerations for each of these. And I will say, because there's so much to think about with each of these, and we could easily spend an hour just talking about best practices alone, we have created a supplemental resource, as Summer mentioned, for you all in case you're interested in learning any more about any of these topics. And you can also use it as a reference guide moving forward in developing your communications. Next slide, please, Summer. So here is a little preview of the best practices resource we put together for you. It's broken down into the 5 sections that were on the previous slide, and each is 1 to 2 pages. It includes additional details, examples, and also links to other learning resources, So definitely keep an eye out for this. We'll be sending it out after our time together today. Next slide, please. So whenever you are developing a communication, the first thing you want to think about is identifying who your intended audience is. So from here, you can then start to understand their needs and how you can direct communication points directly to them, and also inform their decision making. So we recommend developing an audience profile. And to do this, you can consider your audience's expertise levels. So this includes considering not only their expertise on a topic, but also what their literacy and numeracy levels are. You also want to consider what your audience's needs are. So what does your audience expect? And also what information do they actually need to inform their decisions? You also want to consider your audience's priorities. So how can you align your message with their priorities? And you also want to think about how can you frame your message so it really resonates with your audience and their values and their context. And lastly, you want to consider, how does your audience tend to receive information? Is it through the news, for example, or maybe websites? These are all important things to keep in mind. Next slide, please, Summer. So the next thing you want to think about is, is also how you can facilitate meaningful engagement with your audience. And this comes down to identifying the best communication method and identifying how much information to include, or detail, I should say. So to do this, you can consider how much time your audience has. So if you include too much information, you risk your audience not paying attention or losing interest rather quickly. You also want to factor in your relationship with your audience. So are they familiar with your program? Do they have an existing relationship with you? If so, you're likely to be able to provide less detail without them questioning the information you're sharing. However, if it's a new relationship or new audience that you're working with, you'll want to include those additional details so you can really establish that you're a credible source. And the last thing you want to keep in mind is how you will be delivering your message. So will it be in written form, orally, live, or in video? Depending on whichever method you use, you really want to align the level of detail and amount of information to match that communication method that you're selecting to use. Next slide, please. So as mentioned on the previous slide, there are several different communication methods, and you want to ensure the amount of detail aligns with that method. So here are some examples for you. So a written communication method like an infographic or a report or a flyer, it's really important for this document to stand alone. So you want to include explicit details and contextual information. However, if you're using a live oral communication method like presentations or meetings, you don't necessarily have to include those explicit and contextual details on your slides if you're doing a presentation, because as a presenter, you're there to fill in gaps. And you can also, as the audience or audience members, they can ask clarifying questions. And then if you're doing a video as your communication method, you really want to include those explicit and contextual details so they can come together to convey the story that you're trying to tell. Next slide, please. So we want to keep in mind that although each of those communication methods is effective alone, it's really important to recognize the power of leveraging multiple communication methods. So whenever we're doing this, it's often the most effective and inclusive to our audiences. So here we want to look at how we can appeal to different learning styles depending on the communication method that we're using. So the first one is going to be visual learners. So visual learners, they really like those visual aids like charts and diagrams and infographics. You can include those in your slide decks or your written materials. The next is going to be auditory. So they really like presentations and meetings as opposed to just written materials alone. And next we want to look at verbal. So verbal learners, they really prefer those discussions and over one-way presentations. And then next we want to also look at hands-on learners. They really like those interactive components. And then the next learning style we want to look at is social and solitary learners. So social learners, they really like those collaborative and group discussions, whereas solitary learners, they might need some space and time to really be able to absorb the information. So you could include leave behind information for them to explore later, or you could also share information ahead of time. And so as you can see, there are a lot of different learning styles, and folks in your audience are likely going to have a wide range of these. So really including multiple learning styles is going to ensure everyone's engaged in what you're trying to share. Next slide, please. So here we want to go ahead and take a moment to look at an example. So here we're wanting to explore how you can develop a communication strategy, taking into account what we were just talking about with multiple communication methods. So in this scenario, your local health department wants to engage the community to help in planning and evaluating your program. And of course, there are many different ways you could do this, but as I just said, taking into account multi-methods of communication, we would want to do a data party here. And a data party, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a collaborative event where a group of diverse stakeholders, they come together to review, interpret, and discuss data. And the intent of an event like this is to bring together people to make, and so they can have a shared experience where data is more accessible, understandable, and actionable for everyone, regardless of their level of data analysis expertise. So here we want to figure out what types of communication methods could we use. Next slide, please. So with a strategy like this, you're likely going to be working with 3 buckets of communications. The first is going to be advertising. So you can post flyers in spaces that are frequented by your priority population. You can also post these on social media or send them out digitally through a listserv. The next one is going to be actually the data party itself. And so during the session, data parties, they typically utilize various approaches to sharing data in accessible and engaging ways. This is often in posters, the form of a poster or a data placemat. And a data placemat, if you haven't heard of this before, it's a visual representation of key data points. and it's laid out on a large sheet of paper so that people can make annotations there and everyone's able to see it. So it's literally like a placemat for discussion, which is pretty cool. And the last part of this would be facilitation. So the facilitator could guide discussions, they can ask framing questions, and encourage ideas for action. So as you can see, this really taps into using all those different methods of communication and catering to different learning styles. Next slide, please. So next, we want to talk about how you can craft your message for impact. So crafting impactful message, it really comes down to pinpointing what you want your audience to know and connecting it to why they should care. So you can do this by considering some of these points, such as what is the so what of your message? So what is the intended outcome or call to action? You also want to ensure that you're being direct and you provide your audience with information and tools to take action. Next, you want to consider supporting information. So what information does your audience trust? If it's quantitative, what specific data points are most relevant to them? If it's qualitative, what participant stories can you include, for example? You also want to consider framing. So how can you frame your message so it aligns with your audience's values? And you also want to try and use asset-based framing to really focus on strengths instead of problems. And lastly, you want to consider how you can really emotionally connect your message to your audience. So using pronouns such as you can really help your audience feel like you're speaking or calling directly on them to take action. And here you also want to ensure you're highlighting benefits that will be most meaningful to them. Next slide, please. So another essential step in crafting an impactful message is including impactful data. So here we've included some internal sources for quantitative data, and I'll just go ahead and go over these briefly. So using the Parasite dashboards, you can find data points for CFHL activities, reach, and so forth. You can also utilize evaluation project data, such as the Data Storytelling Toolkit, data tables, and every LHD has a data table file summarizing their program and evaluation data for 2023 and 2024. For IOE and adult DE, you have access to data sets summarizing changes in dietary and physical activity behaviors among surveyed program participants. And then with Slack data, you can convey changes in policies and practices where PSE interventions are implemented. And finally, the California Community Obesity Profiles. You can access county level health data, including obesity, dietary intake, and so much more. Next slide, please. So next, we want to highlight some impactful external sources. I'll go through these ones as well. So there's the Ask CHIS. Here we have health statistics by county, region, and state, including demographics, dietary and PA behaviors, chronic disease, and SNAP participation. Next, you have Healthy Places Index. This is a summary score of the healthfulness of a community based on 25 indicators. You also have the CalHHS Open Data Portal, and this provides access to all publicly available data collected by CHHS departments. And you also have the California Department of Education's Data Quest site, and this provides data from California's TK and K through 12 schools, and it's available at school, district, county, and state levels. You also have American Community Survey, which is for the U.S. Census Bureau. This is demographic, social, economic, and health data at multiple geographic levels. And then you also have the City Health Dashboard. So this provides data on over 40 measures of health and drivers of health for all cities with a population of greater than or equal to 50,000. And then lastly, there's the county health rankings, and this provides how counties rank with relation to health outcomes and health factors. Next slide, please. So that was quite a few sources, and now we want to open it up to you. We'd love to hear what sources have been especially helpful or useful to you in the work that you do. So please take a moment and post those in the chat.
I'm going to go ahead and go back one slide just so that folks can see the external data sources we just shared. I know we threw a lot at you.
There are a lot.
I know, but we would love to hear if there are any additional ones that folks are utilizing. Excellent point, Miranda. Miranda asked a follow-up question in the chat. That question being, do you already use any of these that are here on screen? Laura says all of the above. Fabulous.
All right, should we go ahead and move on? And if anyone has anything else, they can post it on in there.
Yes, absolutely. And I do want to make one note just so that we catch it for the recording.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the data storytelling toolkit data tables. I want to make one note that everyone has access to their federal fiscal year 23 data tables right now. Federal fiscal year 24 is coming soon. We're prepping right now, and you should have access to that in January. So not yet, since we're currently still in fiscal year 24.
Thank you for clarifying that, Summer.
No problem.
All right, so let's move on to talk about effective data visualization. So visualizations are a really great way to tell your data's story. However, if you're using visualizations that don't align with your audience's needs or with the data you're working with, you're going to have a missed opportunity, unfortunately. So in order to avoid this missed opportunity, you want to ensure that you always keep in mind your audience, the data that you're working with, and also what you're trying to convey. So are you trying to convey comparison, a process, or a hierarchy, or even a change over time? You can also use tools like the data visualization catalog to help you choose the best visualization for your data. And a link to this catalog is also included in the supplemental resource we will be providing to you later. So keep a lookout for that. Next slide, please. So something else to keep in mind is that some visualizations are just easier for people to interpret. So here we have a framework to help you see which are easiest to hardest to accurately interpret. So I'm just going to walk through these, starting from the right side with the easiest to accurately interpret. This is going to be position along a common scale. So this involves spatial location along a common baseline to represent data. So think of a bar chart where each bar starts from the same baseline. And next, moving on to position along non-aligned scales. So here, this one is less accurate. It involves using a group bar chart, for example, where the bars have different baselines. And then moving on to angle and slope, these comparisons are fairly accurate. A common example of this includes pie charts. I will make a note here, though, that whenever you are trying to convey more than 3 data points, it's going to get trickier to interpret. And then the most difficult to interpret is going to be area, volume, and color saturation. So think bubble charts, 3D charts, and heat maps. These are going to most often lead to misinterpretation. But I will say, regardless of whichever visual you choose, whenever you directly label your data, you are going to alleviate some of that burden for interpretation for your audience. Next slide, please. You can also use color and descriptive titles to convey your purpose of your visualization and also highlight key takeaways for your audience. So color is really a great tool for making your visuals more engaging. However, as you can see, based on the graph on the left, if you're misusing color, you're overusing color, it can really feel overwhelming and make people not want to engage with what you're trying to convey to them. So whenever you intentionally use color, such as on the right, the graph there, we used one of our brand colors to highlight a specific data point. We also strategically use this in the chart title so that we could tie those data points in. You also want to use descriptive titles to clearly convey, the so what of your message. So you can think of these titles as one sentence stories aimed at capturing key insights. So for example, the title on the right provides audience with a quick understanding of your takeaway message. And a few other things to point out, the graph on the right as you can see, we've left justified the title, and that's intentional because in the West, our eyes naturally travel from left to right. So that's just a good rule of thumb. Some other things to declutter your graphs could be removing grid lines, unnecessary axes, and having fewer categories, and also ordering from alphabetical or from largest to smallest. Next slide, please. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about today is choosing the right messenger. So choosing the right messenger is essential because they're going to be the face of your story. So you really want to have this person be someone who is perceived as credible and who also has a really deep understanding of the topic. So you want to let your settings and your goals really guide you here. And here we've included some example messengers such as LHD team members. They can provide impactful, often quantitative data about the reach and outcomes of the program. There's also program participants. They can often share the qualitative side. So they'll be able to tell you the impacts of programs or initiatives on them, their family, and their communities. There's also program partners. They can more directly advocate for funding and resources. Next slide, please. Okay, so we want to take another minute to look at an example here. The goal of this one is to figure out how we would navigate choosing the right messenger for a situation. So in this scenario, your LHD team wants to help improve access to physical activity for residents, help improve health and prevent chronic disease. To do this, you decide you would like to conduct walk audits and park assessments to gain a better understanding of the barriers that prevent community residents from being physically active in their communities. So we would love to hear from you. What are some of the pros and cons of different facilitators for these activities? You can raise your hand or feel free to post in the chat. Right in the chat here, Joanna is saying strong in-person connections, building trust with community. That's a great one. I can also share some that we were thinking about on our end as well. So we were thinking community team members, they're probably experienced in facilitating events and activities like this. So that would be a really great one. Another one we were thinking was community groups and other partners. They have existing relationships with the community, so they could facilitate more engagement and involvement as well. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next strategy that we were thinking of too. So we're going to expand on this a little bit further. So your team wants to sustain this effort and connect with policy and decision makers to implement the actions identified in your assessment. So here, what are some of the pros and cons of different potential messengers for this activity? And again, feel free to raise your hand or you can post in the chat as well. All right, and Jenna shared participants can provide personal stories, how they've been affected by current conditions. That's a really good one. Thank you, Jenna. Another one we were thinking about was community partners. They can add that personal touch. It goes in with what Jenna was just saying. They can add that personal touch and share the potential impact for themselves and communities. We were also thinking that your LHD, you can share results of your assessments to city staff. So you're these subject matter experts. So you're experienced in communicating data best there. All right. We're going to move on, next slide. So what should you do whenever you found that someone else outside your LHD is going to be the right messenger for your communication? You can still play a really active role here, and you can do that by supporting logistics and coordination, also creating materials and refining talking points, and also building capacity of the messenger. And that is it for me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Summer. Thanks so much for bearing with me, everyone. And yes, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Robin. I will take the baton now. And next, let's take a look at how these best practices can be applied to two different stakeholder groups you may be engaging with, current and potential partners. So let's start by thinking about the intended outcome of these sort of interactions. When we're engaging with these groups, what are we trying to do? So if you're looking to engage new potential partners, it's likely that you or your team have a program-specific need, or perhaps you're looking to initiate some new programming that would benefit from a specific individual or group's expertise or resources. In this case, during the interaction, much of your focus would be tailored toward the goal of inspiring buy-in, right? To do this, you might seek to demonstrate the credibility of your team and highlight the mutual benefit that will come from this new partnership. These points around engaging potential partners are probably not new to most of you. It's probably intuitive to think about interacting with potential partners in this strategic way. But what might be a little bit less common for us is to think critically and strategically about the way we engage with our current partners, especially outside of those really material, task-oriented exchanges that happen amidst an active project. So it's clear that maintaining partner buy-in is a fundamental goal. Ensuring that our partners continue to support and believe in our shared mission is crucial for sustaining our efforts. However, let's not stop there. The true potential of these partnerships really lies in going beyond just retention. It's about finding ways to deepen collaboration and building trust over time. So by doing this, we can transform these partnerships into powerful alliances that not only sustain, but also elevate our work. Next, we want to consider that when and how. When connecting with potential partners, it may be beneficial to create brief reports to leave behind after your meeting. This report can spotlight the reach and outcomes of your program in the relevant setting. In drafting this up, you might consider leveraging the LHD data storytelling toolkit and data tables created by NPI, even refining the data to reflect only school settings, for example. If you want to do this but need help, just keep in mind, NPI would love to help you facilitate this, so please, excuse me, please never hesitate to reach out. Now, when connecting with current partners, sharing program data and successes through regular meetings or progress reports can be really instrumental in garnering continued engagement. After all, they've likely been involved in collecting the data, and sharing it back with them can help foster a sense of collaboration. When preparing to share data with current partners, you might consider leveraging some of the site-specific program evaluation data resources that NPI creates for you, like the IOE or Adult DE infographics, or the Slack changeover time summary reports. These are all really, really good tools that we create for each of you. And finally, I'd like to present some best practices for crafting your message to each of these groups. With potential partners, consider emphasizing how your program is aligned with their goals and values. You might choose to describe a specific need you're addressing in the community they serve. This would be a good opportunity to reference some county or census tract health data points. If possible, it can be really impactful to share specific outcomes you've achieved in the same or similar settings. And finally, excuse me. And then finally, clearly share your ask. What are the next steps that you're thinking about? Are you folks on the same page? With current partners, consider positioning your program data as really the focal point of your engagement. It's important to revel in your successes together and pose questions that can deepen collaboration and shape future programming. For example, how can we improve current programming? How can we expand our efforts to reach more participants or increase our impact? Now, next, I was going to ask an engagement question, but I think just because we're running a little bit behind right now, I'm going to skip it for now. and we can circle back if we have a little bit more time at the end, but it could be a good question to ponder with your team. What do the longest lasting partnerships you have look like? What have been the characteristics that have made them so effective and have led to that trust building over time? Just something to consider. Next, I'd like to hand it over to Christina Hecht. Christina is a senior policy advisor for NPI, and she's been so gracious to be a guest speaker for us today, giving a little bit of advice on how to engage decision makers. Before I hand off the baton, though, I want to give a little disclaimer that we're going to talk a lot about local and state policymakers today. But I know that all of you folks in the chat today engage with a wide range of decision makers. This could include school boards or planning bodies, which are all super important for our purposes as well, right? But today we're going to be really zoning in on this in this section. Yes, that's it. I'll hand it off to Christina now.
Thanks, Summer, and hi, everybody. It's great to be here with you today. Slide, please, Summer. So I also work at NPI. I'm part of the other side of NPI, and we strive to do research to inform policy and also to translate information for various stakeholders. And as an aside, we also coordinate the National Drinking Water Alliance. So I'm not going to get into drinking water in this presentation, but please reach out if you have interest in drinking water issues. Slide, please, Summer. So I'm going to start with a real life story of decision maker engagement. I'm part of a group of 2 academic teams and 2 community-based organizations in the Central Valley. We have worked together using community-engaged methods to improve food security by increasing participation in school meal programs. But early on, we learned 3 things that we continue to work on. Families typically aren't aware that school meals must meet nutrition standards. They don't understand everything that goes into producing the meals, and they want to make their voices heard. So we produced 3 of these cartoon-style infographics, and I'm going to share the link in the chat there. And this one tells, in brief form, a story of how community concerns can have an impact. We started by doing a photo voice project with community parents, and issues that rose to the top included concerns about the amount of food items with added sugars. We did focus groups with the students, and they voiced a desire for more fresh fruit and vegetables. Our organizations helped parents and students understand the avenues to make their concerns heard. Some districts actually made menu changes, making the meals more acceptable. Meanwhile, we produced policy briefs, and you'll see one later on, based on the research, and we shared them with legislators at the state and federal level. The community-based organizations also encourage their parents and students to call their representatives on the issue. So as you probably all know, California Senator Skinner put forth a bill to limit added sugars and sodium in school meals, and USDA considered and then formalized the first ever standard for added sugars in school meals. Also, both state and federal have made quite a few more investments in the Farm to School program. So I'm optimistic that the input from our project was of value. Slide, please. I hope this example helped to show that engaging decision makers can reward the community with positive change, that it's actually fun, and that everyone can play a role. Specifically, you can provide information about topics within your work areas to decision makers. At the same time, you may learn about decision maker priorities in a way that can benefit your work. And information exchange helps build relationships, including the opportunity for more in the future. Slide, please. One thing we learned from Central Valley families was that they did not understand or realize the various levels where different types of decisions are made. And Summer just referred a minute ago to these different levels. Families needed to know what level could help make the changes they were seeking. Sometimes we think of these as little p and big P policy opportunities. Little p policy typically influences organizational practices. For example, healthy beverage policy at a local Y, a place of worship, or a healthcare site. Or it could come from a local policymaking body such as a school wellness committee or the school board. Big P policy is usually made by elected officials and then implemented and overseen by agencies, for example, CDPH or CDE. Your town or city most likely has a council of elected officials. As a region, you send elected representatives to our state legislature, and the same is true at the federal level. Slide, please. I want to review quickly and in a very simple overview what policy-related activities are allowed when you're speaking on behalf of your workplace. Lobbying is not allowed. Simply put, lobbying is when you attempt to influence an outcome by requesting a certain action or vote. But you are always free to provide information. Obviously, we want that information to be trustworthy and evidence-based. Now, as the fine print says, you may find community partners who are not subject to these organizational restrictions. So that can be a good strategy. And just a reminder, you are always free to voice your opinion so long as you make it clear that you do so only on your own behalf. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to dig into some ways to engage. We'll look at 3 avenues: written materials, visits, and opportunities offered through our democratic legislative process. And I'm also going to provide some tips for success. Slide, please. So starting with written materials, although of course reports are valuable, in my opinion, the brief is a critical door opener. And the briefer, the better. Put yourself in the shoes of the staffer who's going to get this brief. All kinds of things come across their desks. You want yours to be short, eye-catching, easy to read, show that there's an evidence-based background, and most important, make the staffer think, hey, this looks important. We need to learn more. I want to take this to my boss. I've illustrated with our added sugars brief stemming from that photo voice project I mentioned. You can provide these at an in-person visit or send them by email with a short cover note. You probably know that your legislative office website provides information on contacting them. You can always call and ask for the name and email of the staffer whose portfolio includes a certain topic, for example, nutrition or education. Next slide, please. Have you ever visited the office for one of your representatives? Personally, I love making those visits. This can be in the repertoire for you or for your clientele. The top photo is my husband and me outside Congresswoman Barbara Lee's office in DC. Here are 5 tips for success when making a visit. Google the office for contact information and then email or call to make an appointment. Be prepared to hand over your business card when you arrive. Plan to provide information that they want or that you feel they should have. Be respectful of their time. Visits are usually 30 minutes maximum. Make a one-page leave behind that sums your information on other resources you can provide. Or this could be your brief I mentioned a few minutes ago. On the other hand, it's also a great idea to invite your representative to visit a local program you want to show off or teach about. These visits happen when the representatives are in their home office and not in session at the Capitol. It's a great chance to tell and show. The photo is from a representative visiting a local CACFP site. When hosting a visit, I recommend this resource from the National CACFP Association, and Miranda's going to pop the link in the chat. Slide, please. My last slide in this section is about ways to engage in the legislative process. Public comment is part of our tradition of open democracy. Our regulatory or rulemaking process includes specific periods of time when the public is invited to provide comments. On the federal level, notice of proposed rulemaking is posted online in the Federal Register. Each rule has a docket number, and it's very easy to use the online form to submit your comment. Every single comment must be read and tallied, so the number of comments submitted really makes a difference to how the agency makes their decision. A few tips for success. Unique or individual comments are weighted more heavily than those form comments that sometimes an organization will, say, click here to submit a comment. As a health professional, be sure to mention your credentials and why the subject matters to you. Share your research or other evidence. Comment is also a great vehicle for citizen engagement by your clientele. However, I want to caution that LHD staff need to be careful about county-level restrictions around providing public comment on behalf of your organization. You may need to obtain specific permission, or you may not be able to provide public comment in your work capacity at all. However, you can always comment as a citizen. So you'll notice that I keep harping on this private, individual, and on behalf of your organization. Now, it's less likely, but not out of the question, that you or your clientele could have one of these other opportunities. So I just want to run through them. And again, be super clear about whether you are speaking on behalf of your employing organization or whether you or your clientele are speaking as private citizens. So the listening session. Agencies hold listening sessions to gather input. For example, this spring, USDA held a series of listening sessions around the country about the effectiveness of MyPlate. They will invite known experts or known interested parties, like maybe a trade organization, to provide input on a specific subject under consideration. Sometimes the session is open to all. The photo is my boss, Lorene, speaking to USDA. Maybe I should say our boss for some of us. For success, prepare your remarks carefully because you may have a strictly enforced short, maybe even 90 seconds time to speak. So never waste time with and ah. Briefly state your qualification and then present your input as a few key points. Always be respectful and say thank you for the opportunity to speak. Hearings are another important method of information gathering as part of the legislative process. Being invited to provide testimony up in Sacramento or even in DC is a big honor. The aim is to provide factual background or pertinent supporting information. On the left is an advocate colleague serving as an invited expert witness before Congress. Such testimony is read into the permanent record. But your clientele might like to attend sessions that allow the public to provide testimony, or something called Me Too. On the bottom left is Melissa from Nourish, California, telling her personal experience as a CalFresh recipient. Also, just to note that nowadays, sometimes hearings have a virtual option. A few tips for success. There's usually a set amount of time to speak, usually 2 to 5 minutes, and a formal process for the event. So be sure you know the process and the time details from whomever invited you. Prepare your remarks carefully. Ask a colleague for examples. You may very well be asked follow-up questions by members of the committee that is holding the hearing, so be prepared. With each of these opportunities, you most likely will also be able to upload or leave a printed version of your information, oftentimes with a page limit that allows you to provide more detail. Finally, my last example of a way to inform the legislative process is through a briefing. The photo is of a room used for briefings in our state capitol. Typically, an advocacy group or a committee of the legislative body will hold a briefing to hear from experts to learn more about a specific issue area. Briefings are excellent opportunities to provide more in-depth information on a topic. If you are invited to speak, expect to speak for about 10 minutes. And even though it's longer, stick to those same tips for success. Make a brief statement of the problem first. Clearly lay out your information. For example, today, I'm going to name 3 key considerations. Avoid jargon and acronyms. Your audience is intelligent, but this is not their expertise area. Don't talk down, but don't assume they have the background. Ask if there will be a briefing packet to which you can make a contribution. Always be respectful and thank them for the opportunity. And now just a few closing thoughts. Next slide, Summer. I want to say that I love doing this sort of work, and I find it so stimulating and such an honor. I think my success stems from relationship building with legislative staff and occasionally their bosses, from making sure I always have some type of information to offer, and from expecting that we are all players for the good, not enemies. To remember, it's all about effective ways to provide information, and you heard some great suggestions earlier from Robin. Be thoughtful and creative. You are a subject matter expert with on-the-ground input to offer, and remember, you're providing information about their constituents. What will grab your audience's attention, and what do you want them to take away? If you don't know the answer, just say so. Tell them you will look into it and then be sure to get back to them. This is actually a great way to build those relationships. It's a way to show that you are trustworthy. I urge you to use our democratic process and to help your clientele and others do so too. And next slide, Summer. I just want to end by saying thank you and acknowledge all those friends from whom I got photos. And I think we're ready to move on to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Christina. Just one heads up before we move on to questions. If you folks are working on something and you're not sure if an activity is allowable, maybe it's towing a line a little bit, you'll want to contact your PO for assistance, and you can really iron out how to navigate the given situation. Okay. So it looks like we have about 5 minutes for questions before we move on to our LHD panelists. At this time, I'll open the floor to questions on anything we've covered thus far. Please feel free to type into the chat or raise your hand, or rather just unmute yourself.
You can always email me too later.
Christina, while people are thinking about their questions, I have one to get us started. So you shared a lot of potential different avenues for engaging decision makers. For anybody here today who maybe hasn't done as much of this work with engaging with policymakers, what do you recommend as a first step? Is there sort of low-hanging fruit to dip your toes into this work?
That's a good question, and I wish I had one answer. But I think really, if you go to their website, you can see what kind of legislation that member is sponsoring or co-sponsoring to get an idea of their interests and priorities. And if you see some overlap there with your county or your constituent concerns, that could be a prime place to figure out if you have a role, what you could provide to help.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and Jesse's commenting, and also the committees they are on. Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I'm meeting with a representative, I usually check their website for all that stuff. And if they're on a certain committee where I can put in a little, like maybe they're on armed forces type committee, then I will talk about, the importance of nutrition for being prepared for military service. And there are reports out there about that, and I can cite a report. So that's just a specific example. Well, while we're waiting for another question, I'll embroider on that for a minute more. I would say that sometimes you can find a kind of unexpected way where your concern, like maybe food insecurity, could intersect with a concern of a representative who might not normally think about food insecurity the way you do. But if you link it to some other sector of the population, they might think, oh, wait a minute, this is something I need to think about, if that makes sense.
not to pivot all too hard, but just so that we capture for the audio recording, I wonder if Miranda and Jesse could speak on the conversation that was happening in chat related to a question there. I believe it was related to videos.
Oh, sure. Hi, everybody. This is Jessie from CDPH. We handled a lot of that conversation in a side chat, but essentially there were some questions about allowability tied to like using video as a type of media and whether or not that was allowable if you're using it from the perspective of sharing sort of some of your success stories or to engage stakeholders or to try and garner buy-in on, you know, a particular area. And the answer to that is yes. And looking forward to sharing some more information with all CalFresh Healthy Living local health departments soon about some funds that we have available at the state level to actually help you produce those kinds of videos or sizzle reels or sort of participant stories. And so we definitely encourage that. I think the question was really around allowability and some historical changes in the program that limits local sort of media placement. And that's really around like paid media or paying for sort of like a social marketing type campaign at the local level. And that's now completely handled at the state level. So we were just kind of working out the differences between those two types of media or that fall under a media umbrella. So that was the distinction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jesse.
I do have a question somewhere for Christina. Have you ever had the opportunity to bring in like to bring in Spanish speaking residents in that process when you work and present or you work with legislators? I was just curious, you know, if that was part of a strategy that you have done in the past.
Hi, Anna. Yes, absolutely. I'll say a couple of different things. The public comment process, one thing we investigated is whether comments can be submitted in Spanish as well as English. And we learned that at least for recent USDA comment process, you can submit the comment in Spanish, which really opens it up to more members of the public. And I want to reiterate that those comments from individual members of the public that just state their individual concern are really, those are a really important part of our democratic process and a great way for helping people to feel that they have a role in that process. Also, there are a lot of organizations around the state that will even bring busloads of community residents up to Sacramento for certain events. So if you have community members that are interested in doing that, you might keep an eye out for that. But Jessie's hand is up, so maybe she has something more accurate to say.
No, nothing inaccurate about what you said. More just that, you know, there are examples of this kind of work happening in CalFresh Healthy Living programs around the state in terms of like building sort of comfort and capacity of folks who are not funded by CalFresh Healthy Living to stand in these places and share their voices about what it is that they care about. And so you can even look to something like the Champion Provider Program, where there's training, like the allowable activities for CalFresh Healthy Living are training people on best practice and evidence around specific types of nutrition and PA interventions. You can also give people spokesperson training. You can do that in relation to their work, just or their like role in being a community voice for you, period. How they choose to use that voice on their own time is their own. And so that's not just the Champion Provider. You've got examples of folks who do various types of like resident leadership academies or the Champion program. And I know you in Orange County have done this, you know, over time. And those are completely allowable activities. You can essentially support the preparation of this like all the way, You just can't be a part of the ask in the room. So just kind of like clearing that path for folks that this space of building the network of capacity and understanding and supporting that not only via training and resources and creating even say materials that look like some of the briefs that were shared earlier or the videos that other people can carry and say, this publicly available resource is something that I am aware of, that I want to make you aware of, and these kinds of things. So it's not like we can have no role. We just have a specific role.
Maybe I'll add one more thing, Anna. In our work in the San Joaquin Valley, we made sure to translate those photo evidence briefs into Spanish. And that was, I think, both valuable because when community members sent those briefs to their local representative with an email, it really kind of used their voice more. But something that was so meaningful for me was when we translated our research brief into Spanish and brought it back to the community, and they saw their own voices and their quotes and their photos in this thing with the NPI logo on it, it was really meaningful for them, and it was for me too.
Thank you, everyone. This is such a lovely conversation. I hate to jump in, but I just want to make sure that our panelists have time to get through their slides. So with that, I would love to introduce Laurel Chambers, the project director from Sonoma County. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Diving right in, I'm the project director for Sonoma County Local Health Department, and today I'll be sharing some of the strategies that we have used and are currently using to work on general plan updates. Next slide. All right, so a little bit of background. This work is done through the Sonoma County Food System Alliance and is really made possible by the coalition. I could not have done this alone. The FSA was established in 2009. We released our food action plan in 2012, which was then adopted by the county. And then in 2017, we began looking at general plans as an opportunity to impact local food policy. We realized that food was not mentioned at all in the current general plan for the county or for Santa Rosa, which is our largest jurisdiction. And this led us to go on a learning journey. We talked to a local general plan expert. We invited guest speakers from Santa Clara County. We split up into groups. We analyzed the current general plan and looked for places to insert our food action plan goals. We wrote it up into a white paper. We shared it with the Board of Supervisors. Certain members met with a board member. We did a lot of homework. We did a lot of groundwork. And our original plan was to host a workshop for all of the planners in the county. And we wanted to invite all 9 jurisdictions, get everyone in the same room to discuss best practices and how to integrate our food action plan into their policies. But we pretty quickly realized that we were going to need to take them one at a time and to have a more tailored approach since everyone's on a different timeline. These planning documents cover 20 years often. And so it's quite a lag from one to the next. There's no guarantee that the planning staff that's around right now will be around in time for the next one. So we're currently working with 2 jurisdictions, and the approach has been a little bit different. Next slide. So we first started working with Santa Rosa in 2021. I had met one of the planners through my work on the Vision Zero Advisory Committee. She gave a presentation to that group and gathered feedback to inform the general plan. And so I invited her to do the same thing with the Food System Alliance, and she eagerly accepted. She was wonderful to work with. She ended up attending multiple meetings along with the lead planner for the city throughout 2021 and 2022 to get feedback from the FSA on what we would like to see in the general plan. We gave them our food action plan, and they worked on incorporating that into the draft. But we wanted to make sure that they were hearing from a wider pool of stakeholders and especially from the community. And so we decided to host our own community engagement event focused on the food system. So we actually co-hosted it with the city. So the city was hosting their own events, but since they were working on a comprehensive update of their entire general plan, which is a massive document, we were worried that the food system issues were going to get overshadowed by other elements like housing and public safety, et cetera. So on the left, you can see the flyer for the event that was designed by an FSA member. We used CalFresh Healthy Living funding to pay for the event facilitator who helped us to plan the event, did facilitation during the event, and compiled the notes into a summary afterwards. Next slide. So we outreached for the event in a variety of ways. We first got together as a group and compiled a list of all of the local individuals and organizations that we wanted to be at this event, that we wanted to invite. We then kind of divided up the list, and members of the FSA invited their contacts that were on the list. We knew that a big email blast to everyone wasn't going to be super effective, and so we created sample emails. I drafted a few different versions of an invitation email for different audiences. So there was one email that was drafted specifically to reach out to folks that were interested in ag and more economic issues. There was one that was for community gardeners and urban ag folks. There was one around that was designed to be compelling for folks that are interested in climate and conservation. And so we sent those sample emails to the FSA members and urged them to reach out to their contacts individually and give that individual an invitation. We designed flyers, did social media posts, did all of that stuff. But I think the personal connection was the most impactful. I feel like people were more likely to show up if they had gotten that personal email inviting them to attend. We also were strategic with our table hosts. There was a portion of the agenda that was going to be small group discussions, and we wanted to have a facilitator assigned to each table. And so we strategically invited individuals that are important for the local food system. We really wanted them to attend, but we know that they are very busy, and we know that we knew that it would be harder for them to blow it off if they had an active role in the event. And so that worked really well. They all showed up. They did a fantastic job. At the end of the day, we had about 60 people who attended, a mix of English and Spanish speakers. We provided simultaneous interpretation for those who needed it. The city was able to provide childcare, which was amazing. And we had snacks courtesy of our members who are also farmers. It was a really successful event. And so that's still kind of ongoing. The official plan has not been adopted yet. They are still in the environmental review phase. It's a long process. The timeline looks like probably early 2025. They will actually adopt the plan, and we'll need to see what stuck and what made it in. But we continue to be engaged with the planning team, and they know where we are and they know we're watching. So next slide. So right now, the county of Sonoma is also working on a general plan update. However, they are working right now on just updating their safety element and adding a new environmental justice element. And they have to do that before the end of the calendar year. So they're on a pretty strict deadline. Once that's done, they're going to pivot to updating the entire general plan, which will include relooking at the environmental justice element, which is where the food access policies live. So we're focused right now, the FSA, on getting as much as possible included into this interim plan, and we'll focus on larger community events for the big update over the next couple of years. And the planners are trying to meet with as many groups and people as their time and capacity allows. So they kind of started with some focus groups for county staff. So myself and some other county employees who are also on the Food System Alliance got to participate in those. Through those, we got connected and met the planners, and invited them to participate in FSA meetings, which they were happy to do so. The county will be hosting a community engagement event, and we're planning on promoting this event rather than doing our own, since they're focusing on just 2 elements right now. So we feel like the food policy stuff is less likely to get lost. And then the planners recently presented the draft concepts, including our draft concepts that we submitted to them, to the Board of Supervisors. And so the Food System Alliance submitted a letter as public comment. We listed a few things we were really glad to see in the draft, giving credit, and a few things that we would like to see added. And while I technically drafted the letter, I had an unrestricted member of the Food System Alliance actually submit it. And then a couple of us attended the board meeting. I would have preferred one of the other members to give public comment, but they didn't feel comfortable doing so. I think we need to work on some training. But so I got up and I gave public comment, and I was very careful to emphasize that I was doing so on behalf of the entire group. And I just reiterated the points in the letter. And it's not the first time I've been in front of the board this year. I've been part of a few goal resolutions, which were a great way to get in front of the board and educate them on different aspects of the CalFresh Healthy Living program. You also get a fun photo op. And then I've also given some public comment a few times, being careful always to stay in the lane of educator rather than advocate. And I always run it by my supervisor to make sure it's all good. But that's been a nice way of getting in front of the board and letting them know what we're doing and who we are. All right, next slide. So what I found with engaging with planning staff, it's good to remember that the stakeholder relationship goes both ways. So while they are an important stakeholder for you and what you're trying to do, you're also an important stakeholder for them. They get to count your input and the input of any groups that you're part of as community engagement, which is really important. At least in my county, they report on this. They tell their board, they tell the city council how many people they talked to and what came of that. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for them to use your feedback. So whether that's taking meeting notes and sending it to them afterwards, facilitating meetings, transcribing notes and presenting a report to them. I still remember at the end of the Santa Rosa event, we were pulling papers together, collecting everything into a big pile. And the city planners had assumed that they would be taking that. And I got to say, no, I've got it covered. And the look of gratitude on their face was incredible. They were so grateful that somebody else was going to do that. And we got to present a nice polished report to them. You can see that they're on the right, that our consultant put together for them. And that was just such a gift. Like I said, we don't know how much of our recommendations made it into or are going to make it into the final plan, but we did recently see that some of our draft or proposed policies that we have proposed were cross-referenced in the city's climate adaptation plan. So that's a good sign. So we're hopeful there. But another thing to remember is to be persistent. They are very busy and they have a lot of things going on that they're juggling. I've had to kind of low-key stalk planning staff, but they're always super grateful. And they'll, when I finally get them on the phone, they'll say, "Oh, thank you so much for being persistent. Thank you for continuing to reach out. We really appreciate this." And they're wonderful to work with, but they are really busy in my experience. Because of that, timelines often get pushed back. So it's important to plan for delays. Every time they've said that a draft or a thing would be released on a certain date, I always kind of mentally add a couple weeks because it's almost always a little bit later. And then it's often like, okay, wait. And then all of a sudden the draft is ready. Okay, go. Give feedback, get everything in order, get your event done in time so that they have what they need to then go into the next step and incorporate the feedback. And then it's also important to find out how to elevate recommendations. With the city, they wanted to be in contact with their city council, so they were responsible for that. That's how they wanted that relationship to work. But then with the county, we were told to email our comments and our recommendations directly to the Board of Supervisors and to CC the planners on the email so that the elected officials could see that we were in touch with the planners, we were working with the planners, and also to make it easy for the Board of Supervisors to then direct the planners to work on it. So that's an important thing to consider as well. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laurel. That was wonderful. I think we will wait to do questions until the end if that's okay. And we can do them sort of at the same time. I will parlay then into our next speakers. I'd like to introduce Megan Beard and Ana Luciano Acenas from Orange County.
Thank you, Summer. So before we start, I thought we'd give you a little bit background of Orange County. So just as a reference, in Orange County, the CalFresh Healthy Living program is able to tap into the expertise of the Safe Routes to School team within the Health Promotion and Community Planning Division, which is part of the local health department. We are fortunate to have two health educators supporting the Safe Routes to School and active transportation efforts, not exclusive to CalFresh Healthy Living sites. Today, we will hear from Megan, who has several years of experience working with the city and other community-based stakeholders. Her successful partnerships even led to funding opportunities for projects in select cities and school districts, enhancing the overall safe routes to school and active transportation projects in Orange County. Next slide, please. So just, as a reference, this is Orange County. It's the little circle there. It represents 34 cities and 28 school districts altogether. And for those of you who may not know, Orange County is the fourth largest recipient of SNAP Ed funds in California. So we are looking a little bit more in the project in La Habra, which is North Orange County. It's one of the 4 cities identified in the Orange County Health Improvement Plan with the highest needs. La Habra youth are served by 3 public school districts, and our CalFresh Healthy Living team primarily supports the La Habra City School District with all its 9 Title I schools. Next slide, please. So what does it take to communicate effectively and engage stakeholders? In particular, today, we will hear about the La Habra project focusing on communication and relationship building. So I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Megan Beard.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Beard. I'm one of our 2 Safe Routes to School coordinators. I've been doing this work for 10 years, and I would say that effective stakeholder engagement is the most pivotal part of the work. Without our partners and stakeholders, we could not do this work. So when asked, what I thought the key components of effective stakeholder engagement are, these were the 4 things that came to my mind. Summer, do you mind advancing the slide? Thank you so much. So the first one, finding mutual goals. Everyone wants to work together on common goals. Safe Routes to School partners include school districts, school staff, parents, students, city planners, traffic engineers, code enforcement, Parks and Recs department, police department, city council, and many more. For that reason, you're going to hear me talk a lot about these specific partners throughout the presentation. So when it comes to mutual goals, schools love this specific project that we do because it's a wonderful leadership opportunity for their students. During the course of the project, which I will describe in the next 3 slides, students gain many skills like public speaking skills, data collection, and they learn about the civic engagement process. The traffic engineer, the city traffic engineers, sometimes it's plural. In the specific example we're going to talk about today, there's 1 traffic engineer because La Habra is a small city. But these traffic engineers love having the walk audit report that is a result of this project because it demonstrates community involvement. So this was mentioned in the previous presentation. You know, they in order to secure funding when they apply for with applications, they often need to demonstrate community involvement. So this is an easy way to have a mutual goal and to kind of check the box for traffic engineering, and it's already something that we do in kind. Police department, they need and want a positive community relationship. So this provides a great forum for that. The second item on the list, checking in, following up to see how things are going. Are goals being accomplished? Have priorities shifted? We in the Safe Routes to School project really like to have early communication with our city partners. We like to give them a heads up about what types of issues the youth will be presenting so that they're not caught off guard. When working with city partners, our approach is to collaborate, not to agitate. They're our partners, they're not our advisories, and they also want a healthier and safer community for residents. Number 3, recognizing partners and stakeholders. I think this goes a very long way. As often as I can, I give thanks and recognitions to our partners. When it comes to students, I love to commend them for their efforts and their bravery. They get up in front of a group of adults and they present walk audit findings, asking for changes to be made, and that takes so much bravery. So throughout the process, I'm always commending them on their efforts and bravery. When it comes to our city partners like traffic engineers from public works departments, same thing. I'll give an example of an opportunity I recently had with the city of Fullerton to publicly thank their public works department. I was part of a panel presentation at the Fullerton Collaborative, and as soon as I finished sharing my portion of the presentation and I was going to hand the mic to Dave, the traffic engineer, I went ahead and let the room know. This room was full of city residents, businesses, a whole host of partners. And I just let them know how wonderful their public works department has been, how responsive they are to the needs, how they come out, thoroughly investigate all of the intricacies and all of the things that we bring up in walk audits. So I was just able to share that, and it was from the bottom of my heart. It's just been such a great experience working with them. And that kind of thing goes so far. So Dave, the traffic engineer, his boss from Public Works, the director of Public Works, was also sitting in that room. So he got to hear what a great job his team is doing. And, you know, we don't have the budget to give a gift card thanks. And honestly, I feel like giving that kind of appreciative thanks goes even further than some monetary gift can give. All right, and so the last point I wanted to make was to be flexible. For those of you who are on the call today and you work with schools, you are very well aware that you need to be flexible. Sometimes you show up to a school and they're like frazzled, oh, this is happening on this day. And you know, you had already prearranged for them to have an auditorium ready for you and to have all of the appropriate equipment that you needed. But all of a sudden they're saying, oh, we're gonna have to conduct this in the quad, you know, sorry, can we do it on the steps of the school? And you just have to roll with it. So, you know, you can't be glued to your PowerPoint presentation. There have been times when I've had to be, you know, flipping through photos that I luckily had in my bag to kind of train the students on the fly. So being flexible is a huge piece of the puzzle. Summer, can you advance the slide, please? All right. So the next 3 slides are going to speak directly to the project we did at Washington Middle School in La Habra. But just so that you all know, we do this project with many, many schools throughout Orange County. The model that we use follows this basic structure. So we initiate contact with the school based on data, need, readiness, or other relationships. When I began doing this work in 2015, I had no relationships. I was essentially performing a Google search and cold calling the partners I knew I needed to accomplish the work. Fast forward to this project with Washington Middle, I've now had a relationship with this school district and city staff for nearly 10 years. Back in 2015, I invited Michael Plotnick, the city traffic engineer, to come to the La Habra City School District Wellness Committee because I knew that we hoped to get Safe Routes to School language in the wellness policy so that things like walk to school day, safe routes to school, walk audit, all of these terms would be common language in the district. Come to find out at that meeting, Michael had goals of developing a citywide Safe Routes to School master plan. Our goals were aligned. we've been able to conduct walk audits at most of the 9 La Habra City School District sites, and Michael has been able to use that data to apply for funding. So after our initial contact with the school, the next thing we do is we identify a core group of students to carry out the project. Usually this looks like a ASB group, a PAL group, some type of leadership group that's already regularly meeting on campus. The next thing we do is we meet with the students to discuss the bigger project and all of the details. From there, we train the students to conduct a walk audit, and then we accompany them to do so. So our walk audit is a photo voice project. You can see some photos here. So the students are equipped with cameras and clipboards. They're note-taking, they're photographing the different issues. And the reason we do it this way, the reason it's student-led, is because they are the agents of change. They know their neighborhood best. They can give us those anecdotal experiences that they've had. They tell us where the drivers don't speed, where they don't yield to pedestrians. Of course, we could go out and we could physically assess, okay, a sidewalk ends here. There's no appropriate crossing here. But the students really know the intricacies of their neighborhood. So that's why we use this model, and it's student-led. All right, Summer, if you don't mind advancing, please. So our next step is then for the students to present their walk audit findings to stakeholders. So following the data collection, we meet with the students to debrief the findings, prioritize the key issues that they feel strongly about, the things that they want to talk about, and then we help prepare them to present to stakeholders. So in the room, oftentimes, are all those partners I mentioned at the beginning. So it's school district, school staff, it's all the city staff. So city planners, traffic engineers, code enforcement, parks and rec. So all of these major stakeholders within the city are there present at the presentation, listening to the students present their findings. Summer, can you advance, please? And so at this specific school, you can read here bulleted some of the environmental changes that were a result of this project. But additionally, I just wanted to sort of back out and look at the bigger picture. These, like as I mentioned earlier, these walk audit reports have been used by the city traffic engineer to apply for additional funding, and just this April they were awarded a large amount of money to develop a safe routes to school master plan, and that's among many other grants that they were awarded over the last several years. So yeah, I just wanted to really reiterate that the bringing the partner to the table at the beginning, getting the policy in place, getting the environmental changes come as a result, the system changes that happen. You know, now the Hopper City School District annually participates in Walk to School Day. Some schools even have Walking Wednesdays. So these partnerships are very long term. They take a long time, a lot of follow up, but the work that can be impacted and made possible by these partners and partnerships are very vast. So I'm going to turn it back over to Anna now, and she'll close out our presentation.
Thank you, Megan. So, just in summary, just little things to consider. Finding mutual goals, making it a win-win situation is very important. One of the things that Robin shared is making it visual as a communication mode. So the use of an action planning tool from TOP is actually one of the tools that we've used in Orange County for planning meetings, defining mutual goals. Checking in. Routine communication is definitely important. Going beyond just emailing your partners, phone calls, visiting them, connecting with them virtually, or sometimes even including them in electronic newsletters is important, because keeping them engaged, interested, and curious about the work that we do is always very helpful. We don't only communicate with them when we need something. The other thing is recognizing partners and stakeholders. There's different ways of doing this, from a simple thank you note to nominating them at the city council or board of supervisor recognition event can be options. But sometimes even creative electronic cards or videos highlighting their contributions in an event that you collaborated with is also another way of recognizing them. but one thing that we also want to share is, you know, the flexibility part. You know, as the public health servant, we do follow the heartbeat and the direction of the families that we serve. So it's very important that, you know, regardless of the funding streams, the leadership changes, and, you know, the annual student graduation or staff turnovers, we kind of keep true to the goals and try to demonstrate flexibility as much as we can by keeping calm. Next slide, Summer. So, you know, the ongoing communication here is an example of a newsletter that we send out to all our partners, just not the ones in La Habra, but folks who we want to reach to support our Safe Routes to School, active transportation, walk to school day events. Here's an example, but you know, Megan and I continue to support the city collaborative and wellness district meetings where such topics can be a priority. And so we hope that we can continue working with them and using the different modes of communication that we actually learned from Robin's presentation today as well. So with that, I'm going to close and say thank you for the opportunity for having us be part of this webinar. If you have any questions, here's our contact information.
Thank you so much, Anna and Megan. What a wonderful presentation. I know we're at exactly 11:32, so let me just say before, if anyone needs to hop off right away, we will stay on for a few minutes for questions. But for those of you who have an 11:30 meeting, this recording will be sent out as well as the slides. So you will have the contact information of all of our guest speakers today. We will also link out to a supplemental PDF with the information that Robin shared, as well as some additional resources if you want to learn about any of those particular topics more. Thank you very, very much for tuning in today. But I know I have some questions for our guest speakers. So if you have a few minutes to stay on, let's open it up to questions, definitely. Maybe I'll kick it off since I am just itching. Laurel, I'm so curious to hear about any of the differences between working at a city level versus at the county level, right? Is there anything you think folks should keep in mind, like about the distinction between working with folks at those different levels?
Great question. And in my experience, not really. The biggest difference between the two that we're working with right now is the scope of the general plan update. So it's very different if a jurisdiction is working on just a couple elements versus working on an entire update. But the as far as like the planning, that's been pretty similar. The one difference that I'm not sure if it happened with the city, but the Board of Supervisors requested a workshop of the planning staff to present these like high level like draft concepts and to be able to ask questions and give feedback. And if that happened with the city, I wasn't aware of it or part of it. But that was a feature of the county update. And just a reminder that it's good to stay up to date on what the relevant council or board has on their agenda, and see if you can get in there to give a public comment or submit a letter.
Thank you so much. I see a question in the chat from Anna. We have not used youth engagement curriculum. I am now curious to check it out. Is it for elementary, middle, or high school youth? Christina, do you know off the top of your head?
Before I leave, I just put the link for it in the curriculum, but I think it's mainly for high school. We are putting in a proposal to use it on a new project. So I was curious to know if anybody had used this and could give me any tips. Anyway, check it out, guys, and you have my email. If you have thoughts, let me know. I need to run now to my next meeting, but thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Bye.
Please do reach out to Christina if you have any questions about the work that she does. She is such a wealth of information and has years of experience in this area, and she is just a lovely human.
Aw, Summer. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Bye, everyone.
Summer, I have
Yes.
I have
No,
a
go ahead.
question. It's for Megan. I'm curious, how did you identify the students that you involved, and also how did you get them interested in the project?
Yeah, so most often it's a pre-established leadership group at the school. So ASB group, a PAL group, and that's it's mostly determined by the principal. The thought process behind that is that we don't want to be pulling kids from class, but they're already regularly meeting. They already have some type of leadership project that they need to engage in, and this is the perfect project for them to take on. So that's typically how it goes. Occasionally, just this past summer, we did a summer project. It was with OC United. It was with a subset of students from another school, or a different school in a different school district. And that group, again, it was already a kind of a regularly, they were coming to the summer camp and they needed a project. And so that was how it was established.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So it worked out perfectly. Thank you.
I have another question for Anna and Megan. I'm curious what it looked like in that preliminary phase of building relationships with city staff, right? It seemed like by the time you talked a little bit about building your relationship with the schools over the course of 10 years. I wonder what it looked like building the relationship with city staff over that time, because it seems like by the time we got to the example you talked about, you guys were pretty tight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at first it was cold calls. I mean, it was, it was, we would have our research team collect the appropriate data to kind of plot what schools need the extra help. And then it was a matter of me picking up the phone, calling that principal, telling them why they should say yes. And then once we got the school project running, it was a similar thing with each city. It was looking up, who the traffic engineers are for that city, who's in public works, and then contacting that person, explaining the project, explaining our goals, and how they fit and align with their goals. And just kind of making a case for why they should be at this meeting, why they should come out and hear the students present. So yeah, it was really a lot of cold calling at the beginning. And then now, with our cities like La Habra, Santa Ana, Fullerton, Anaheim, or I could go on and on. I have we're on first name basis. So it's no longer, it's very rare that I'm cold calling now. It's more, hey, we're doing this one this year, please come support. And they're happy to do so because they have seen, the benefits to their own work.
I did want to add also that if there are opportunities to attend city-based collaboratives in your region, go ahead and attend it, because while they may not be there for safe routes to school planning, they might be there for other projects, but it's kind of nice for them to see you, that you are committed, not just when it's time for the safe routes, So I think that type of in person, building that trust beyond the project scope is very important. So Megan and I actually tag team, we try our best to represent HCA, CalFresh Healthy Living, whichever meetings we both attend.
I have one more for Laurel. So, I hope I don't mess up the phrasing. I made a note when you were speaking. You spoke about your work on the Santa Rosa General Plan and that you wanted to make sure that the planners were hearing from a wide pool of stakeholders, and especially from the community. I'm curious how you determined who should be looped in. You mentioned so many different sectors. How did you really pinpoint who ought to have been looped in? Yes.
Yeah, it was a joint process. We spent a significant portion of a Food System Alliance meeting with a giant spreadsheet in front of us and brainstorming and adding names of individuals, adding names of organizations, and particularly focusing on ones that had direct contact to folks in the community. So we didn't just want like the staff from Grayton Day Labor Center, for example, to attend. We wanted them to attend, but also to invite their membership and invite their community members that they are engaged with. And so that was one of our goals, and we tried to think of community-based groups that that had contact with members of the public that we thought would be likely to have an interest in these kinds of policies and planning. And it's tough. I mean, we still ended up getting mostly, you know, stakeholders from organizations who were paid to be there, more than, you know, actual community members. We did have some, but that is an area that we continue to work on. And one of our lessons learned, and, you know, as a result of that initial event, we identified some areas of weakness that we could do better with. And so we're, you know, specifically, you know, one example is we realized that we didn't have any good contacts with any of the local tribes or tribal organizations, and so we're really working on that. We have been for the last year and trying to make inroads with those groups, to engage those groups, and we have started to, and we have incorporated what they have told us is a priority in what we're asking from the county. So that's been really really good.
A shared spreadsheet of all of the different like target stakeholders sounds like a really good idea to kind of see what sectors you're covering and like who you already have relationships, and like you said, who, like, where some of those gaps or like only budding relationships might be. That sounds like such a good tool to use.
It's a living document for our coalition because we're also trying to make sure we have representation from the different food system sectors in our coalition, which is an ongoing challenge. So
Yeah,
it's a work in
absolutely.
progress for sure.
Always,
But yeah,
always,
it's
right?
been a good tool.
Well, those are all of my questions. I want to give one final call for the audience members. I know I'm taking up a lot of the airspace right now. Well, thank you all for staying with us, not just for an hour and a half, but an hour 45-ish, and especially you, Lauren, Anna, and Megan, for the extra 15. Um, This has been fabulous. We so appreciate you sharing your expertise, and I appreciate everyone here who listened in. Please do follow up via email if you have any lingering questions or if you'd like to connect. Like I said before, I'll be sending out everything shared today, as well as some supplemental opportunities for learning. I hope you have a wonderful Thursday and an extra wonderful long weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.